I'm going to talk with a little more granularity about how you formulate emails. I would say always include a subject line if you're sending a professional email. You never want to have a blank coming across to the other person. You want an email subject line that's useful to the person, that's a substantive email subject line that gives them information about what the email is. And I think with this kind of written communication, with any kind of written communication, you need to be thinking about your audience. You're trying to help them understand what it is that you want, what it is you're trying to communicate. You want them to understand immediately what it is you need, but you also want them to be able to go back to that communication later. So to make that subject line useful, I think you really have to think about, how can I describe it in such a way that communicates to that person what I need, what I want, what I'm trying to say. Never, hello or meeting, because if you put meeting, then they may get 10 other emails that say meeting. You want them to understand it's about the meeting about the professional development coordination for 2014. In other words, put that detail in there. The other reason email subject lines are important is that you may have to search for those emails later. The person to whom you have sent those emails may have to search for them later. So if there's not content there, it can make it really difficult for that person to go back and retrace the communication. And in a law firm, the email is typically part of the client file as well. So we have standard ways we like, everybody doesn't always do it, but we like people to include the name of the client, a description of the deal or case that's involved. Some people actually use the client matter number in the subject line. I think that may be a little overboard. But just something that's going to let the person easily file the information as well, because that's sort of an extra step for the person. Some people are very formal in email communications. Other people are less formal. You do take cues from the person that you're writing with. I would say in most cases you should not be using smiley faces. I mean, I think Mark would probably say never in law firm communication, and there are definitely attorneys at the firm that would say never use an emoticon, period, ever, the end, in any kind of email that you send for work. I've got to say there are certain people, okay, you're back and forth, you might have a little smiley face that comes in, but don't use an emoticon as an excuse for clear writing to communicate your tone. I think that's what a lot of people do, is they don't think carefully about how to word it so that their tone comes across, and so they will use an emoticon sort of as an excuse for poor writing. One thing in terms of, we're going to talk in more detail about communicating with recruiting staff specifically at law firms, but one thing that our director of attorney recruiting said is that generally when you're having your first communication with the recruiting department of the firm, you should be addressing the person as Ms. or Mr. So-and-so. And basically you should continue to do that until you receive an email from that person that's signed only with their first name. So in other words, communicate very formally, very respectfully until you get that email back that says Carrie instead of Carrie Wagner, for example. It's always a good idea to use a signature block, especially, and this I think applies in every context, but when you're applying for jobs, it's good to have a signature block that says who you are, what school you go to, what year you are. Again, you're giving information to the person that you're asking to consider you for a job, or someone you may be having further communications with. In terms of professional emails, it's really important to use a consistent font. Sometimes what we see coming in from law schools, and I think this may be a function of working between an iPhone and a laptop sometimes, but we see very different fonts in paragraphs. So the first paragraph will be Times New Roman. The second paragraph is like sans serif or something, and is a different color. And if you that really comes across as very unprofessional. You want to be sure that the emails that you're sending out are, in my opinion, dark blue or black ink. I do see people that come into a firm and are using pink ink, for example, or pink font, for example. And I've got to say, I think that comes across as very unprofessional. And I've actually told people, great for communicating with friends, but not so much in the law firm email. You need to use a professional font. Preferably something like a Times New Roman, Libri.
I prefer that the email not look like a ransom note with 4 different colors, 5 different fonts. Just keep that in mind.
Right, even with the signature block, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
even the signature block. Not that you don't want yourself to stand out in any way, but rainbow is not a good rainbow for that particular communication. along with double checking your attachments, you want to double check your links. If you're sending somebody a link to something, just be sure it's operative. I think that's less critical than the attachment, because if the link doesn't work, well, it doesn't work and they have to get back to you. You're not sending the wrong thing, you're probably just sending something that doesn't work. But to be user-friendly, your link should be to the right thing. It should take you to them to the exact page you want them to look at. Make it as specific as you can and as helpful as you can. And I feel like we really can't overemphasize how important spelling and grammar are in these communications. It really, especially when you're establishing your reputation in whatever organization you're working in, you want things to be perfect. People know that we work in a very fast-paced environment, and they know that you have to respond very quickly, but you have to take that extra time to look at it, make sure that it's professional, make sure that there aren't any misspellings, and that you're not using any programmer, because you're trying to establish your reputation as someone that can be depended on. And if you have typos or grammatical errors in your emails, that person, there's a subtle thing that says, if there's a typo here, what else is the person not going to catch? So we talked about some of this already, the size of the emails, being sure that they're not too big, making sure that they're user-friendly. And this is someone that has been working in vendor training for a while, you may know this, but you know, sometimes when you send an email from within the firm, you have a choice to send an attachment that's actually a separate attachment to the document, or just a reference to the document on the firm's system. And if the person is traveling and they're not logged into the network, they may not be able to pull that document up. So you just want to know, does the person need it to be an attachment? Is it better for the person to have a PDF, for example? Like, some people are traveling and they're using their iPhones, their iPads. It's really hard to read documents that are in Word sometimes on an iPad, especially for comments. If there are track changes, it's much, much better to send a PDF in some circumstances. So just be thoughtful about the mode of communication there. Metadata, as I'm sure you may know, is information about a document that's not actually part of the document that you see when it's printed out, but it may give you information about when the document was created, who wrote it, who edited it, what edits were made. And so you have to be very sensitive when sending out documents to be sure that you're intending to communicate that information. A lot of firms have a program that strips out that metadata, but if it's not, for example, you could send a settlement agreement, let's say, where all the person has to do is turn on track changes to see your thinking behind the changes, or see the various revisions that the document went through. So you just need to think about that and be careful about that. Privilege concerns, very big deal in any form of written communication. You, in a relationship with a client, will have an attorney-client privilege, I'm sure you know. And you'll be communicating privileged information through email formats. So the best practice is, if you're sending privileged communications, to actually indicate that in the subject line and in the text. So that it's very clear from the outset that it's privileged and confidential attorney-client communication. If it's privileged, it should be labeled as privileged. Don't copy your clients on emails to opposing counsel, because clients may not notice that if they do a reply, all that is going to go to opposing counsel as well. So, you know, you're trying to take care of your clients, make things easy for them. If you need them to see something that you've sent to opposing counsel, forward it instead of copying them.